In 1976, a murder in Mount Hood, Oregon would not only leave one woman a widow, but it would be the catalyst for Stockholm Syndrome making its way back into the courtroom. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to my channel and Killer Concepts, the place where we talk about all things true crime. My name is Peyton. If you have not already done so, please make sure to hit that red subscribe button down below and turn on your post notifications so you do not miss any future content. Today we are going to be talking about a murder that occurred in 1976 in Mount Hood, Oregon, while a young couple was camping to celebrate their first wedding anniversary. Not only that, but we are going to talk about a movie Lifetime created about the case. The Lifetime movie is actually based off of Ann Rule's book, Empty Promises, about the murder where she changed the actual victims' names, but either way, it is about the murder of 21-year-old Julio Torres and the kidnapping of 16-year-old Candra Torres, who was his wife. So we are going to start by talking about the real case. Then we are going to get into a bit about the movie and the summary of that, and then we will end with a little bit of a comparison between the two to basically see what Lifetime got right. With that being said, let's just jump right on into it. So this whole story starts when in July of 1976, a 16-year-old Candra Torres and a 29-year-old man named Thomas Brown would make their way into the police station to report what they said was an accidental shooting of Candra's husband, 21-year-old Julio Torres. They would tell the police the following story. So in July of 1976, 21-year-old Julio Torres and 16-year-old Candra Torres would drive to Mount Hood in Oregon so they could celebrate their first-year wedding anniversary. I know what you are probably thinking. Candra was only 16 and she was married to a 21-year-old, am I right? Well, try and remember that this was the 70s, so people did marry younger, but in this case, Candra and Julio were together and they were in a serious relationship and were in love. From what I got from the Case File podcast about the case, Candra's father insisted the two marry before anything happened between them that was meant for the marital bed, essentially. This is why they were married so young. So this young couple was camping in Mount Hood National Forest with their dog Rusty. The two would be at the river, struggling to catch fish, when they would meet a 29-year-old man by the name of Thomas Brown. At first, the two just talked to Brown about fishing. He would tell them that he knew the area well and that he really knew a great fishing hole that he could show them, that they could finally catch fish at. That's what they really wanted to do. Candra really wanted to catch some fish. And so at first Julio was apprehensive with following the stranger, but he would give in and all three would relocate to another area in the woods and they would camp out for the night. The next day, Julio would set out with Thomas Brown to go hunting, and Brown had a gun with him, obviously, because they were hunting. Candra would hear a gunshot go off in the distance. Thomas would tell Candra that it was an accident. He handed the gun to Julio, and it just went off. So when the two would enter the station, Candra would tell police that she saw everything and it was an accident. Both Candra and Thomas would even pass lie detector tests or polygraph tests on the story that they told. And so after a small investigation, Julio Torres' death was deemed accidental. However, soon Candra would change her story. And on August 2nd, she would return to the station to tell police that while she was at the campsite cooking breakfast, she heard a gunshot go off. According to A&E, after the gunshot went off, Brown would come back to the campsite and then shoot Rusty, the Torres' dog, right in front of Candra. Torres recalls saying, quote, "You shot my dog," end quote, she says. He had a big smile on his face and then replied with, quote, "I shot your husband too." End quote. Candra then recalls Brown taking her further into the woods where he would sexually assault and rape the 16-year-old repeatedly. Please keep in mind this poor girl had not only just lost her husband, she was now also being tortured by his murderer, who was forcing himself upon her, and she was only 16 years old. When Elizabeth Smart, a fellow kidnapping survivor who I'm sure you have heard of, would ask her why she would lie in the first interview during a Lifetime special called Elizabeth Smart Finding Justice, Torres would reply with the following, quote, "I remember waking up in the morning and just having all of these memories hit me. I was so confused. I remember that. And all the baths. So many baths, you just want to be clean," end quote. Torres remembers praying to God for protection and Thomas Brown, possibly because of her fear or that she had showed him her devotion to God, would decide to spare her life. But Brown would spend 2 days trying to convince Candra that her husband's death really was just an accident so that she would corroborate the story when they spoke to the police. So he would basically keep repeating it over and over again until she believed his side of the story, even though he had previously told her that he had killed her husband. The Daily Mail reported that Candra said, quote, "He told me the story of how Julio was accidentally shot, so it was well ingrained in my mind. At that point, you're almost grateful to this evil person because you're alive," end quote. She would also tell police that she believed him, quote, "To protect yourself, you want to believe what you're being told because it's so much less traumatic. Now nobody murdered your husband to rape you. So I believed that it was an accident," end quote. When investigators heard Candra's change in story, it at first made them suspicious. So they would give her a second polygraph to confirm it. But she would actually fail this polygraph. However, with polygraphs not always being a fail-proof, they did not exclude her new testimony. I just want to pause for a minute. So we already know that polygraphs, they can be passed by someone who is lying and they can be failed by somebody who's telling the truth. A lot of it really plays on your emotions and your heart rate and things like that. And so you have to think Candra was a young girl whose husband had just been murdered and she was tortured out in the woods for days. So it would make sense that she would possibly fail this polygraph. So while she failed the polygraph and they didn't fully exclude her new testimony, they also didn't understand why she would lie to them the first time around if someone had killed her husband. Wouldn't she want them to know? But Candra's mother really championed for her. The police believed she may have had Stockholm syndrome, but her mother didn't stop fighting to have Thomas Brown put in jail. So unfortunately, with Candra's change in story and her failed polygraph test, it really did not make her a reliable witness in the case of a trial. And there was nobody else around the time Thomas Brown shot Julio Torres. Thankfully, police would eventually go ahead and they would arrest Thomas Brown because they believed he did do it. And he would end up confessing to a cellmate in jail that he did in fact shoot Julio Torres and hold Candra Torres in the forest. Thomas Brown was convicted of murder of Julio Torres in 1977 and has stayed incarcerated at Oregon State Penitentiary. It's really scary when you think about it, because when you think about traveling to these forests, I mean, we just talked about the Pincho Park situation in a previous, like a really recent video. You think when you're with that person that you care about and you meet a stranger that, you have that protection, but you really you can't trust anybody. And sometimes it's just better to go with your instinct. So now that we know the story a little bit, I do want to discuss a little bit about Stockholm Syndrome and how this would end up being used in the trial that helped convict Brown. So at Brown's trial in 1977, the judge at the time allowed testimony on the mechanisms of Stockholm Syndrome. This was unprecedented at the time. At least that is what Anne Rule said in her book that I had mentioned earlier. This is because this disorder is considered extremely rare, especially back in 1977. then they wouldn't have had too much information on it. So if you don't know what Stockholm Syndrome is, it is a psychological condition in which the victim develops a perceived connection with their captor. It is believed that Candra Torres may have suffered from Stockholm Syndrome after her husband was killed and Brown held her against her will. This is because Brown made Torres believe that she needed him after her husband was murdered. She did not know where she was, or how to get out of the woods, or how to get help. She really saw Brown as her only option at that point, and so Stockholm Syndrome would kind of make sense. So she thought that if she played into all of his delusions, their future, for example, which he would tell her that they were going to get married and live in the woods. So if she played into these delusions and did everything that he said, she thought she would then live. This is when Candra and Brown started creating a bond. For this reason, Candra started to believe him when he went from saying the shooting was on purpose to saying it was an accident. This was an easy way to bury her trauma. There have been a couple of movies that have been produced on this case, but today we're just going to talk about A Murder to Remember, which is based on what Anne Rule wrote about the case in her book. I am going to give you a synopsis of the movie, and then we will compare it to the actual case. So just to give you a little bit of background, A Murder to Remember was a Lifetime movie that was released in 2020. The description on IMDb for the movie is, quote, "A couple whose 1-year anniversary camping trip turns up deadly for the husband, leaving the wife alone in the wilderness. When she accepts help from another camper, she ends up putting her life in his hands," end quote. I do want to mention, I did not think this was the best synopsis for this movie. It makes you think that the couple did not meet Thomas Brown when they were together. It makes you think that Candra met him after her husband was dead, and that is not the case. The following is a more in-depth description of the movie, but may contain spoilers. Please note that in the movie, the characters' names are different from the real life people. So in the movie, Candra's name is Robin, Julio's name is Javier, and Thomas's name is Sam. So the movie starts with Robin walking into the police station with Sam, saying that there was an accident and her husband was shot in the woods. She starts to tell the officer the story, and the movie flashes back to their trip camping. So keep in mind, this movie, it goes from them being in the woods to what's happening with the police station and the actual case, and it does that multiple times. So just keep that in mind when I'm describing this. So basically, Robin and her husband Javier decide to go camping in November to celebrate their first anniversary. They meet a guy by the name of Sam Turner in the woods when they are fishing, who says his truck is stuck, and they help him get unstuck. He offers to help them find a better fishing hole because, they helped him. And while Javier does not want to go, Robin actually convinces him because she really wants to catch a fish. They had not been having luck catching anything. But he gives in, and they follow his truck in their car, but he just takes them in circles, basically saying he made a wrong turn. And he convinces them to stay there with him and camp for the night. And they start to trust him, and they say yes. When a deer runs by, Sam grabs a gun and runs into the woods after it, saying he was going to bag himself a deer. Robin's husband runs after him, and she hears a bang soon after. Sam says that he just handed him the gun, and it went off, killing Javier. Robin starts to run, and Sam chases her down. He's still playing the good guy, saying that she is going to get lost. He gets her to stop running. And then it goes back to her telling the police officers what happened in the current time frame. So she says she got them lost, but Sam helped her out of the woods, and she couldn't have gotten out without him. Robin's mother comes, and she is allowed to take her home while the police keep investigating. The daughter goes home and tells her mother that her husband's shooting was not an accident, and that they need to go back to the station and accuse Sam of intentionally shooting Javier. She admits she was kidnapped and kept in the woods for 5 days. It flashes back to the past where her husband was murdered, and Sam scares her. He's acting very nonchalant about just shooting her husband, and he's yelling at her, so she tries to run from him again, and he catches her. And then Sam basically says that he works for a super secret government entity called the Organization, and that someone is trying to track him. He says that her husband found out about this organization and he just had to shoot him. He didn't have a choice. The cops decide to look into this. I do want to mention this reminds me a lot of Colleen Stan and The Girl in the Box, which is also a true story, and how Cameron Hooker basically said something that was very similar to what this guy said to keep her captive. That's another one that probably developed Stockholm Syndrome. So Robin ends up taking a polygraph with the police and she fails, and they think that she is lying to the police about her new story and that her mind is just playing tricks on her because of the traumatic incident of her husband getting shot. So Robin starts to believe in the movie that the organization is following her, and she's paranoid. So in the meantime, the police keep searching, and the state police sends the detective in the case the record of Sam Turner, which includes big crimes such as possession of illegal weapons, homicide, and manslaughter, and assault and battery. Once they get the records, they start to believe Robin and take her change in story a little bit more seriously. They confirmed that there was no government entity called the Organization, and the detective tells Robin she believes Javier was murdered by Sam. She recommends Robin go to the hypnotist to try and get her memory back. She remembers seeing other people when she goes to the hypnotist, but he threatened them, so she would not reach out. She remembered him sexually assaulting and raping her. This abuse would go on for days, and she remembered him admitting to setting them up to kidnap her. The investigator chooses to bring Sam back in. He comes in with a lawyer alleging that Robin is making everything up, and the lawyer points out how he passed his lie detector test and that Robin didn't. So the police let him leave the station, and Robin goes to visit her home that she actually shared with her husband, Javier. And then she sees Sam out of the window, so he is starting to stalk her now. They put her in a safe home, and forensic evidence ends up coming back proving Javier didn't accidentally shoot himself by grabbing a gun, and the cops decide to charge Sam. But Sam is missing. Robin is working at a convenience store and is confronted by Sam. He tries to get her to change her story. This is when police would end up putting her in a safe home. I'm sorry, I got that a little out of order. At least until they could locate Sam. So in the past, Sam gets sick when the two are out camping when he's keeping her hostage, and he thinks he is dying. So he agrees in that case to go to the sheriff's station and tell the truth, or what he says is the truth, getting her to admit everything was an accident. She agrees, and he leads them back into town. He convinces her to use his story on the way into town over the next couple days. So then the movie goes back to the present, and police find Sam hiding in his tent inside the woods and put him under arrest. Robin decides to testify against Sam, and that is how the movie ends. So it's really kind of an abrupt end. You don't see the trial. You don't see all the information. It's just with Robin coming to terms with her actually wanting to testify against him because she at first wasn't going to. So I knew that was a long synopsis, but I wanted you to get the full picture of the difference between the movie and real life case. So what comparisons can we make between A Murder to Remember and Candra and Julio's actual case? So let's just start by saying that I think Lifetime actually did do a pretty good job on this one. Their movies aren't always the best when it comes to true crime, and there are a bunch of true crime ones that stray extremely from the real case, but I don't think this one strays that much. Maybe this is because they based it off of Ann Rule's book. And if you are aware of who Ann Rule is, she was an amazing investigative true crime author. She is well known for her books. and she did a lot of research and always had really accurate information. So if they based it off of that, they based it off of somebody who spent a lot of time researching. So one of the first things that I thought was very similar between real life and the movie is that in real life, Candra said that when Brown said he shot her husband and dog, that he had this wide smile on his face. She said he had that creepy smile a lot. This is something that they portray in the movie, which I think shows a big attention to detail, because they had to have paid attention to something like that for the actor to be doing it throughout the movie. I remember, so I watched the movie before I researched the actual case, so the actual case was fresher in my mind. And I remember when I was watching it, basically saying, like, that dude's creepy. Like, why does he keep smiling like that? So now something that differs from real life is that in real life, Candra and Julio have a dog that is also killed by Brown when they are in the woods and everything happens. In the movie, Sam and Javier do not have a dog with them at all. So while I said that Lifetime paid a lot of attention to detail, I think this is something they could have easily included. Perhaps they didn't because of the animal cruelty aspect of including something like that. It may have upset a lot of people, but I mean, Lifetime upsets people all the time. And they did, however, portray Sam's love for hunting and killing animals in the movie, and that is something that Thomas Brown was like in real life. Another thing I want to mention is that I believe with the movie mentioning the organization, I think that is something that occurred in real life when it came to Thomas Brown. I remember seeing it in one of the articles. I didn't see it in all of them. And I just remember that being like, that is just like Colleen Stan and Cameron Hooker from The Girl in the Box. Yeah, I feel like they did a really good job with this movie. Now, there was like a lot of back and forth. I don't remember reading anything in real life about him stalking her. I could be wrong, but I do not remember reading anything like that. So I don't know if that's something that Lifetime added to try and add a little bit of suspense or something to their movie, because I don't remember seeing it. But overall, I think a lot of the crime facts are accurate. Kind of like when they bring up that forensics basically showed that Julio didn't shoot himself, or Javier in the movie. I am sure that is something that actually happened, because in the movie, I believe it actually has to do with how the gun would have been held and the gunpowder residue. Like, he didn't have it on him, and he would have had some on him had he shot himself, even if it was by accident. That is all I have for you on the case of Candra and Julio Torres, and I'm happy Thomas Brown is still in jail. I think this is a horrific crime, especially when they were out celebrating their anniversary. They were a very young couple. You know, Candra's life changed very young because somebody had shot her husband, and her husband was only 21 years old. So my heart goes out to both of their families and Candra, that somebody could even put someone through something like this. If you have not done so, please make sure to hit that red subscribe button and down below, and turn on your post notifications so you do not miss any future content. If you have any case suggestions, please send them to killerconceptsblog@gmail.com or comment them down below. And if you are interested in following me on social, all of those handles are down below in the description box as well. Recently, I have been most active on X. Before you go, just remember that the world's most dangerous minds hide in the most unlikely places, and to stay safe.